So that was the title from Richard, and I can indeed testify that we've got enormous support from the school, and this would not even have happened, without the support from our research, knowledge exchange and impact team, from the directorate, from the head of school, from wonderful and amazing colleagues present here today, and we're also delighted, of course, to welcome people external to the university, and we really believe today would be, the start of a lot of conversations. And I know that Professor Sarah Cunningham is speaking at the end, but I do need to acknowledge her straight up to say thank you so much for coming and for all the support, as the lead of EDI in our university. So, the introduction, to how RIGEN started. Obviously, we have our bios, on the invite, and we also have a lot of information on the RIGEN website. So I'm not basically going to rehash all of that, where we're from, in terms of our own research. But RIGEN actually did not just start out of the blue. It emanated, like Richard mentioned, from CERES. A lot of the members of RIGEN now were members of CERES as well. And we hold a great debt of gratitude to Professor Rena Ashad, who was such a driving force for CERES and the impact that it made in Scotland and beyond. So we got together because we wanted to expand the scope. For example, how do we look specifically at race and inclusivity in global education? That's kind of just repeating what RIGEN stands for in case you didn't know the acronym. We got them together to talk about what we want to do, and we want to do it. How do we get other people involved? We got people from, for example, sociology, from medicine, so that we could have different disciplines involved in the conversations. And these conversations took place over months, even in designing the logo. It was a collaborative effort, and I thought it would be lovely to just, say something first about this logo. I think we had moments, of, genius or whatever you call it. We shouldn't say that about ourselves, we're educationists. We're very, very humble. And it was about what was around us. So this logo, to our mind, signifies, and that's with the color, the deep shade of green. Everything around us is within us, at our core. So that's why we kind of have, the green and the deeper shade of green encompassing the logo, but at the core, at the heart of it. And then we had what looks like two faces facing. And I remember the first iteration of logo design, and a colleague who's from Asia said, "Ooh, that looks like money." And we're like, that's not quite, I mean, not this logo, this perfect logo I'm talking about ages ago. But the thing was, by doing that intercultural process, by listening to other people, even at the very onset, we managed to get a consensus and to what the meaning of this logo is. And as Richard mentioned, yes, race is a social construct, but we're all impacted by it, regardless of our shade, regardless of our affiliation, regardless of where we are in the global world, be it the so-called global north or the global south. Now to what we want to talk about. Our aims really is to talk about race inclusivity in an inclusive way. That sounds like, oh, okay. But we realize that even speaking about these things may not always be done in an inclusive manner. Because I like to use this a lot, Robert Frost, and why, about mending walls. Who do we keep in and who do we keep out? And by definition, how do we define what is in and who is out? Can we flip it? And are we missing, if we keep some people outside the so-called boundaries, be it of knowledge, be it of food, we like food, and that brings us to the questions we want to pose today in this event, and going forward, obviously. And I had to write them down so that I will stick to the questions and not go beyond them. Why do we do research? We all know the so what question. So what? But in recent consultations, with mentors, with my champions, and I've been trying to narrow down what exactly are we trying to do here. We say we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We say we don't want to maybe disrupt things too much. Not everybody thinks so, obviously. But the thing is, what do we gain by what we do? And what do we lose by doing nothing? One of the things that's come up in my research is about the notion of pain and discomfort when we talk about racial inclusivity. And my favorite way of saying it is, the pain is for everyone. In Fryer's word, which not mine, the pedagogy of the oppressed, when we deal with these issues, both the oppressed and the oppressor, and I have the bystanders, have something to give. So the question then is, what are the issues? And what can we do about it? And how do we connect our research into action and for impact? And how do we make change happen? Who should be involved? Going back again to who are the insiders, the outsiders, and the bystanders. What exactly does it mean to be inclusive or to be involved? Robert Frost, or somewhere, says, good fences make good neighbors. Does it? Always? You'll be the judge of that. How high is your fence? So what do we miss when we are not inclusive? Do we feel a sense of loss? Or do we feel a sense of accomplishment based on our own privileges? Today we'll share our dream and our vision and our aims to build bridges. But we will not shy away from the necessary questions required to aid our learning and our unlearning about the hegemonic structures that makes it so desperately needed to have an inclusive world. And also our role or roles in this. The excellent panel we have here would make an attempt to unravel some of these naughty questions. And not, I don't know how that came out, it's not naughty as an N-A-U, it is K-N-O. We open conversations, oh gosh, I got a note from Marlon. What do you have up your sleeve? What would the talk Balalake be if I didn't put somebody on the spot? Anyway, we hope the conversation today can build a fertile ground for further discussions. Not an unending loop of talk and more plans and more desires and more whatever we write, wherever we write them. But to step up the commitment to use our knowledge, to spur action, to use our research, to inform policies and practices, to make education at all levels truly inclusive for all. And I'm delighted to welcome the panel. I'm going to hand over now to Farah, who would go on and handle this very, very important aspect of today. Thank you.
feel like it's a very passionate open. So good morning, everybody. My name is Farah Akbar. I'm a member of RIGEN. I'm a lecturer in language education, and I'll be sharing the panel discussion. We have an amazing panel today to discuss a very important topic, the role of research in fostering inclusivity in global higher education. But before I go to them, I just want to take a bit of a temperature of the room. I want to ask you if you can raise your hands if you're here because you're already engaging in research that considers any aspects of inclusivity. So if you're already doing research and you're dealing with some aspects of inclusivity, you can just raise your hands just to see who's everybody here. Excellent. Thank you very much. Can you raise your hands if you're here because you'd like to know how you can learn from today's session to apply, to practice in your own classroom? Practitioners. Excellent, thank you very much. And can you raise your hands if you're here because you're interested in the topic and you want to know more about it? That's everybody. Excellent. So we've got researchers, we've got practitioners, but most importantly, we have everybody who's very, very interested in the topic. So thank you very much for that. So the goal today is, or rather, whatever your role here today, is that the idea for today is that you come away with something at the end of the session, an enhanced understanding, a new idea, a fresh perspective, a new strategy that you can apply in our higher education in an inclusive manner. Okay. The expectations. So here's the format for the panel discussion so that you know what to expect. We'll take a few moments for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background, their affiliation, but background with respect to their work on inclusivity. And then I'll kick off the conversation by asking questions that will draw out some of the themes or some of the things that we should be thinking about, and I'll direct the questions to different panelists. And then the last 20 minutes, we'll open up the floor to give you an opportunity to ask questions to our amazing panel. And then we'll close the discussion with a final remark from all the panelists, and then we can enjoy lunch afterwards. How does that sound? Excellent, we'll see a lot of nods. So I'm going to start the panel introductions. Perhaps I think I'll start with Davis, if you don't mind, Davis. If we can then go down the line, you can just briefly introduce yourself and then your affiliation and a brief description of your work with respect to inclusivity in 3 sentences. I have to say first that I know you're expecting Professor James Smith to be here, but because of unforeseen circumstance, he can't be here today. And Dr. Davis Banda has kindly agreed to step in at very, very short notice. Davis brings in a wealth of experience, and as the Director of Learning and Teaching, I'm sure you have got a lot of things to say. So over to you, Davis.
So you've heard that introduction. It was a very easy one. Who's our buddy who's not going to say no to our request and we can twist his hand? So they informed me yesterday. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I traveled this morning from York. I was intending to be here, to be sat on that side, so I'm sitting on this side. I'm Davis Banda, Director of Learning and Teaching. I'm on a mini secondment, and that leads to my research. So I'm seconded to the World Cup, the Qatar World Cup. I'm working with the World Cup. And how does that link with this workshop? My research area is mainly in sport and international development. So the kind of work that I do is I came on the scene when there was a recognition of non-government organizations contributing towards HIV and AIDS. And so the thing was, if you are going to design any programs for us, how is our voice shaping those programs? And the global north, global south, and money, is coming from the north, going to the south, the global south. So as one of the young academics at the time, I then started to put my voice there, as in, how do we shape development, as in unmuting the subaltern or unmuting those that are marginalized. And so that's the work that I'm doing even now with Qatar World Cup. I'm looking at how do we shift from the global north to more south-south relationships. And that's the inclusivity that I'm doing within that area. Thank you.
Thanks. bring it up, Mihai, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Mihaela Mihai. I'm a political theorist in politics and international relations here at Edinburgh. And my research focuses on processes of political memory making. And in particular, I'm looking at how states curate their memory and use selective amnesia in order to build a very self-serving image of themselves, of who the people are, of who belongs and who doesn't belong, who is excluded. And I try to show how these narratives about the past very much help reproduce inequalities in the present. And I think that's the first reason why I was invited. The second one is that I teach the second largest course in the University of Edinburgh, which is entitled Political Thinkers, which is supposed to be an introduction to political thought that 560 students are going to take this year. And as a convener of that course, I bear a huge responsibility in thinking through the very questions that Labaki articulated for us at the beginning of this event. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's really an honor to be here at the launch of this network, and I'm looking forward to seeing what wonderful interdisciplinary work comes out of this. My name is Sudha Arunachalam. I am from New York University. I'm a visiting fellow at IASH this semester. And I am a linguist by training, and my work focuses on child language acquisition. So how do infants, toddlers, preschoolers, how do they learn the meanings of words? How do they figure out how words go together to form sentences in the grammar of whatever their language or languages might be? And I interact with inclusivity in sort of two main ways in this work. One is through looking at children who are learning languages other than English, Turkish children in Turkey, Korean children in Korea, and what kinds of cultural and linguistic differences have those shaped their language acquisition trajectories. And second, through the lens of disability, I also look at children who are acquiring language, who may have language disorder, autism spectrum disorder, learning disabilities, things like this. And in addition to my research in these areas, I'm also the editor-in-chief of Language Acquisition, which is a journal, one of the 4 sort of main journals on child language that addresses these issues. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to this.
Hello. Hi, I'm Dr. Martin Grief from the University of Brighton in West Sussex, and it's a pleasure to be here for this RIGEN launch, and happy to be part of this panel. I'm a former primary school teacher actually. I worked for about 14 years as a primary school teacher. I guess a significant turning point for me in becoming a critical conscious primary school teacher was the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the Macpherson report, and how there needs to be more race education as part of the curriculum. So that forms part of my doctoral studies. I've recently, 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote a book called Decolonising the Curriculum, Eurocentrism and Primary Schooling. So I've part of my work for my doctorate in that. Recently, I've worked with colleagues around the world, all 5 continents, and we've got a book coming out next month, Decolonising Curriculum Knowledge, International Perspectives and Interdisciplinary Approaches, which looks at decolonising curriculum knowledge across the countries that my colleagues are based in. So that ranges from Colombia, work with Barney's, who's part of this group here, to countries like the Netherlands, Poland, Rwanda, Nepal, Thailand. So a lot of my work at the moment is related to teacher training for decolonising curriculum knowledge, but also international development as well. And the South-South relations that you talk about, David, is similar to what I'm doing as well. So just happy to be here to share some of my work and ideas.
Thank you. I'm going to have to ask for the mic back. Right, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to kickstart the discussion with a bit of an icebreaker question. From your perspective, panelists, what does it mean to foster inclusivity in education? Now, just a word or a sentence, just to have a feel of where your stance is. What does it mean to you, from your perspective, to foster inclusivity in education? And perhaps we'll start with, I know David is looking at me with a very strong stare. Would you like to start off, David?
I'm going to start from here.
Okay.
So I'm going to respond as a director of learning and teaching within education, because I'm a director of learning and teaching within this school, the School of Education and Sport. So for me, in a very short word, it's about when people come to the sessions that I handle, is my agenda setting inclusive or marginalizing some people? So agenda setting can be a way of marginalizing others or putting others aside on the fringes and not bringing them to the core of that debate. So how do you set your agenda? Is it very inclusive, or is it limiting some and muting them?
Thank you so much. I'm going to answer this question as a political theorist, and I think the question requires us to answer an even bigger question. What kind of society do we want to live in? And if, as is the case in the UK, we have supposedly committed ourselves to democracy and to an ideal of equality, then we have to ask, what kind of educational system must we have if we are truly committed to an idea of democracy and of equality? And this requires us, of course, to ask who has access to education, who does the educating, how is knowledge produced, who has the authority to decide what counts as knowledge, who benefits from how our educational system is currently organized. This question, cui bono in Latin, who benefits, has always have to be at the back of our mind. And I have another quick sentence. As somebody who comes from Eastern Europe, from a post-socialist country where I paid absolutely no money from kindergarten to graduating university, I am perpetually baffled at the way in which there is a consensus that the way in which education is organized in the UK is normal, and it's okay to have young people entering the labor force burdened by debt, and to have the educational system reproducing effectively and actively the structures of class, race, ableism, and so on and so forth in a society that supposedly is democratic. So how can we politicize this question? And I hope this event will help us move with courage and good faith and curiosity towards getting the politics on this matter really robustly and efficaciously.
So my one word in answer to this question is non-negotiable, right? Must have, long overdue. I'll just leave it at that.
I'd really stand everybody at the table of leadership, and inclusivity is about forming those relationships with each other, that create a currency of knowledge between each other that everyone can thrive from. So everyone at the table leading in direction of development and listening to each other, and on that journey of creativity.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think we could safely say that everybody's starting from the same sort of points, right? And I think everybody, I see a lot of nods, so everybody's along with the same line. Okay, so this is for Michaela. Let's start with Michaela first, for the first question. I think all of you will have some of this question as well. I think it's been tweeted, so it's not a surprise. Michaela, how can accepted knowledge in research methodologies reflect inclusivity? Right, we have a lot of researchers in this room, and I'm pretty sure they want to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. And again, I was asked by the organizer to reflect about this question from within my own field. And what I'm going to try to do in my 5 minutes is to think critically about the attempts that have been made from within the field to address head-on these difficult questions that we're here to contemplate together. As a first caveat, I should say that no discipline is uniform, and there are, in my discipline as in many other disciplines, multiple schools of thought, multiple methodological orientations, multiple intellectual traditions, which differ in terms of the level of methodological reflexivity, conceptual capaciousness, or epistemological humility. So not all political theories are the same, right? The problem for my field, as I see it, and I know some people might find this controversial, is that here in the UK, we are suffering a lot from what has been called the flight from reality. The withdrawal into abstract theorizing that is disconnected from reflections in history, in sociology, in humanities, in all the social sciences, in economics. And because of that, we have very important erasures of the very structures that we're here to address together in political theorizing. However, as I said, no discipline is uniform, and we have had within this discipline, especially in the Northern American Anglo-Saxon tradition, so not so much here in the UK, I want to emphasize that, certain efforts at problematizing the erasures and the blind spots of knowledge production in political theory. And I want to just walk you through three of these to give you a sense of what people have been trying to do, the good that they've done and the shortcomings that are still plaguing their efforts. The first attempt at working with received knowledge and trying to build on that is the development of in the 2000s of what is called somewhat improperly comparative political theory. So in this field, we have had some efforts to bring into philosophical conversation scholars belonging to various traditions, this was an attempt that started with. And I think Sudha will talk about this very cogently later on, with Anglo-Saxon theorists learning a foreign language and studying texts in that foreign language and calling that comparative political theory, which of course for somebody like me who is not a native English speaker sounds a little bit strange, because of course this is just a tokenistic effort at engaging with other traditions and a self-congratulatory exercise. Look at me, I can speak another language, therefore I'm doing comparison. In the process, of course, setting the Western canon as the term of comparison, as the inescapable term of comparison. And of course, this was very much criticized, and there's been ample writing on it, and people have shown the limits of such an approach. And luckily, over time, the field evolved and became more and more critical of its own practices. So much so, it is now quite aware of the fact that who reads what, when, for what purposes, in what terms, on whose terms, are actually key aspects of the imbrication between knowledge and power. And the field has undergone massive transformations. It is now entering, I think, a phase of methodological maturity wherein the key participants are aware of the perils of reproducing exclusionary habits of thought, and also the demography of the field has been completely exploded in the last 10 years. So we have a lot of knowledge production by a lot of thinkers coming from a multitude of world traditions of thought, publishing books together, engaging in very difficult and hard conversations. However, and this is where I come to the first shortcoming of this approach, while alert to and often attentive to how imperial power can be linked to knowledge production, there is still the fact that we cannot avoid that this field is restricted to Anglo-Saxon scholars and scholars, international scholars who can write in English. And while the book series and the textbooks and the journals that have been published include scholars belonging to a wealth of tradition, they are audible. These scholars who come from outside of Europe, outside of North America, their voices are audible only to the extent that they make their research available in English. And I think there is an important conversation that I'm sure we will have about the importance of language and the importance of translations and the importance of linguistic boundaries in thinking about inclusivity. The second one that I think will also be addressed later on in the panel, the second attempt in political theory was the decolonize the canon movement, yes? And of course, this has led to many methodological debates, to the rewriting of syllabi, to the rewriting of textbooks. There's a fantastic textbook coming out this year out of London that actually, I think, best encapsulates the attempt to decolonize the canon. This has been going on for a few years now, and there are different rationales that scholars dedicated to this project have brought in justifying their selections and the way in which they have structured these textbooks and these courses. And of course, there are better and worse modalities of thinking about how we can decolonize the curriculum. Unfortunately, the go-to strategy, which is justified by appeal to pragmatic concerns. We just don't have enough scholars to teach these other thinkers. We just don't have the time to learn the work of other thinkers in order to include them on the syllabi. And all these kind of lazy and I think quite problematic reasons. For all these reasons, the decolonize the curriculum in political theory has remained at a superficial level. And I quoted, add women and people of color who have written about gender colonialism and racism and stir, right? So this has been the go-to tick box exercise that's happening a lot in political theory. And of course, this is highly problematic, and I want to refer here to the work of Adam Getachew and Karuna Mantena, who have shown so cogently that there are three shortcomings, at least three shortcomings to this approach. First of all, Eurocentrism remains the only object of critique. Second, political thought developed outside of the European canon is covered only to the extent that it articulates a critique of the West, and not in itself for the kind of theoretical insight that it can provide us with. So we talk about other thinkers only as critics of the West, not as contributors in themselves to our understanding of what politics is. And thirdly, marginalized thinkers tend to be studied as belonging to discrete, well-defined traditions in ways that support an untenable historically, sociologically, idea of cultural purity and isolation of tradition. So for all these reasons, I think the effort to decolonize the canon in political theory remains a work in progress that requires a lot more work. The third attempt at thinking through the implications of knowledge production and the reproduction of power structures in society with respect to the field of political theory has happened in this field of social epistemology. And here we have a certain development, also since the late 2000s, and this development is the development of the field of so-called epistemic injustice or epistemic justice. So in this particular field, the publication in 2007 of the book by Miranda Fricker called Epistemic Injustice has triggered a big literature that theorizes the ways in which epistemic authority, who has the authority to decide what knowledge is, and epistemic privilege is unevenly distributed within the academia and in so-called democratic societies. And this literature has led to important questioning in analytic philosophy especially, and great work has been published on gender, racialization, class, and knowledge production. However, I think this is where we need to stop and pause and ask, isn't this field that developed in the 2000s reinventing the wheel? There's a massive literature in post-colonial, decolonial, anti-racist, critical feminist theory that has been asking these questions, we can say all the way in the beginning of the 20th century. So this is at best a catching up effort, which is also quite pervert and paradoxical in the sense that this is a field dedicated to problematizing the erasures in knowledge production. And yet, by forgetting all these literatures that have been asking these questions for decades, the field itself perpetrates another erasure. It's an instance of political forgetting. It's not just academic epistemological forgetting, but a political forgetting of authors who have already contributed great insights to the question of how is knowledge produced, what role do gender, class, and racialization play in what counts as knowledge. So I've tried to give you a sense of some of the key inclusivity, inverted commas, projects, and highlighted some of their shortcomings. And the discussion has been at the epistemological level. I've given you an epistemological picture. There's knowledge production, political theory. People have thought, okay, we need to reformulate what counts as received knowledge and try to diversify what counts as knowledge. And we have decolonized the canon, comparative political theory, and this epistemic injustice. But this is an epistemological debate. And I think in light of what I said in my opening remarks, we have to think about the materiality of the profession. Who counts as a political theorist? Who counts as a political philosopher? Who is considered to be the embodiment of an idea of theory and an embodiment of the idea of philosophical reflection? And of course, because of the closeness to philosophy, which is one of the least inclusive disciplines, I think, in academic research, political theory remains predominantly white, predominantly male, and predominantly oblivious to history and sociology and the lessons of the social sciences here in the UK. So if I were to really sum up what I was trying to say today is that what we need to always take into account in thinking about inclusivity is the importance of political memory with respect to knowledge production. And we need to cultivate what I call a genealogical philosophical imagination. So whenever we're doing political theory, whenever we're doing philosophy, we need to think about the origin and the historical evolution of our concepts, because of course concepts are never innocent, they always come with baggage. And that baggage will very much influence how we see the world today, how we see politics today, how we understand who belongs and who doesn't. The second point I want to say, I want to highlight is the importance of representativity in the profession. And I want to emphasize that commitments to decoloniality, anti-racism cannot remain a declarative tick box exercise on various bureaucratic forms or a PR stint. And I'm actually sorry that the VP International is not here, because in the last few hiring processes I've been involved over the last few years, there's the standard decolonize the curriculum question to the candidates, and it just becomes a completely meaningless exercise. I think this is my second point. We need to avoid the tokenification of this question. And in terms of training future researchers, it's so important to valorize the knowledge produced in critical history, critical social sciences, and of course to emphasize language training, because some of the worst forms of parochialism in thinking come from the parochialism of one language. So I want to close here, thanking you for the opportunity to reflect on these very important questions. Thank you.
Thanks, I think I hear the importance of to know what knowledge is, whose knowledge that we're producing and reproducing, and that's something that I've sort of taken away, and that we have to consider critical events in history to open up our thinking, so not to forget things, not to have that amnesia you're saying. Panelists, anybody wants to jump in with additional comments or insights to this question before we move on?
Can I ask questions of the audience, just of the audience in particular? Is there any researchers using narrative and biographical methodologies as part of their research process? Put your hands up. Yeah, I mean, there's a few of us here, but in terms of research methodologies, we spoke about this earlier, and the power of the knowledge that we create through the worlds that we see in the relationships that we have with our families and friends or people that we meet across the world. It's giving value to that methodology as a form of knowledge production that can challenge the dominant discourses, and I find that those approaches are really, really powerful. So yeah, I just wondered how many people here would be using those approaches, because we spoke about that as well.
If you want, I can come back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is one of the methodological tools that has been used more and more in other fields of political theory that I haven't mentioned here. And I think one of the most important articulation of the value of knowledge coming out of political struggles, and more than knowledge coming out of activism, as a form of theory. Yeah, not just as illustration for theory, but as a form of theory, has been best theorized by Patricia Collins. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with her work. And I think the most important imperative that she articulates for us is that we need to pluralize the sources of knowledge while simultaneously being aware of the social conditions that make those narratives possible in our societies. What are the social conditions that make narratives coming from anti-racist, decolonial class struggles possible? Right? So we need to simultaneously move back and forth from the knowledge encapsulated in the narrative itself and an attention to the conditions that made those narratives possible in order to get a broad and complex understanding of the social world.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to move because I'm just looking at the time, but we can have the conversation going on in the Q&A session. Now I'm going to turn to Marlon. Now, Mihaela made a point earlier about the effort towards decoloniality should be meaningful, not tick box sort of exercise. I know, Marlon, you've said that you've written a book on decolonization. What to you are the current challenges regarding embedding decolonization in the curriculum, and how can we address them?
Yeah, thanks. I've got some personal experiences of this from the work I've done at Brighton as well, being part of the Race Equality Charter Mark steering group for achieving our bronze for that. And I'll try and talk a bit about that, but I just want to talk about, this question for me sort of brings to fore that there were a variety of competing discourses around the meaning of decolonising the curriculum and tensions. At one end, it's interpreted as an opportunity to broaden thinking, knowing and seeing through alternative lives to the dominant. I think right at the front called white hegemonic epistemology, but I'd call it a Western hegemonic epistemology because that sense of whiteness is almost conducted in sort of black countries as well through the legacies of colonialism, isn't it? So that is one end, and at the other end, the proponents who see this, who consider decolonising the curriculum as dangerous, as woke, in relation to anti-racism and critical race theories. So you've got those tensions that are playing out in universities and in society. It's a battle. It's called the culture wars in that respect. That's been going on for quite a long time, and these permeate into universities. So there will be colleagues who will be of opposing positions across the world in terms of what is meant by decolonising the curriculum. Is it dangerous, or is it something to profit from? And I guess from my experiences working at Brighton and from talking to colleagues at other universities, I've seen a lot of work on decolonising the curriculum occurring at grassroots level. There's always been critical practitioners out there in universities challenging curriculum discourse. They've always been there. It's come to the fore a bit more since 2020 and the Black Lives Matters anti-racism protests, but they've always been there. And that grassroots movement that I've seen is, I guess, it's been generally from non-white activist academics, but I guess since the Black Lives Matters anti-racism protest of 2020, and since the creation of the Advanced HE Bronze Award and Silver Awards, there's been a bit more focus on what those grassroots activists have been doing, and there's been a bit more under surveillance by university management in that respect. And this is some of my experiences, especially with colleagues that I've worked with in terms of the work that we've done as well. And sometimes that organic leadership, natural leadership can be repelled and hijacked by university management in what can be seen as a manufactured performative approach to decolonising the curriculum, especially where there are badges out there available for universities to gain and to put on their websites to attract students. So decolonising the curriculum to some extent has been commodified over the last few years because of those badges that are available. One way in which I've tried to sort of define the notion of decolonising curriculum in this book, or promote it a little bit, right? Decolonising the history curriculum, Eurocentrism in primary school. It's more, it's in relation to ITE really, because being a former teacher, but I kind of give three different interpretations, and the first one is the revolutionary approach, which I guess management at universities, white-led universities, would be quite fearful of, because that relates to notions of black radicalism, keeping the Andrews' work, for example, Afrocentrism, the opposite of Eurocentrism, bringing in that kind of perspective, that way of knowing, that way of being, that challenges Western ways of thinking. So that's one way of considering decolonising knowledge or decolonising the curriculum. Then you've got the radical approach, which I discuss as I kind of discuss through transformative, critical, multicultural education through the works of Banks and May and Sleater, for example. So that doesn't dismiss or doesn't sort of negate Eurocentrism. It accepts that that's everything, but it also gives space and room to see the world through alternative epistemologies in that respect. Okay, so that's more of a radical approach, which needs to be considered. And I guess that's what I'm kind of positioned in my work. And then what I've seen a lot of, especially with advanced HE coming to the fore and talking about this work, is more of a gestural, superficial approach to decolonising the curriculum. So this notion of diversification, that term being used being used by some people across the academy to suffocate the term decolonisation. Let's diversify, let's not decolonise. And I argue that you have to decolonise first. You have to decolonise first in order to diversify later. Right? That's I've always argued that. So I've kind of pushed back against that term diversification, aiming to suffocate decolonisation. I think you have to do the first before the next. But certainly through that sort of gestural superficial approach, there may have been changes to reading list, or a university may have invited a black a professor in to do a talk, and that's it. We kind of tick the box. It's not enough, is it? It's very surface level. So I think my position is with that particular that kind of radical approach, if you want, you could call it a radical approach, but it's very much an approach that aims to look at curriculum as it's a construct, of course, a bit like the way in which you see the universe, almost like the solar system. It's there, we accept it, but that's just, there's a pluriverse of knowledge. I think Walter Mignola uses that term, the pluriverse in terms of knowledges, and I think you can sort of talk about it in terms of order versus disorder. So if the pluriverse is disorder, if there are lots of knowledge bases out there, and we spoke about inclusivity. It's about people coming together to create a brand new universe of knowledge, and that brand new universe of knowledge, which is part of the colonial perspective, isn't fixed. It's fluid, because when new people come in, then they look at that universe and they look to the pluriverse and they create another universe of knowledge bases. So I think that's where the creativity of inclusivity, in terms of having those relationships through our own lives, in terms of what we've learned using narrative and biographical methodologies, that's where it comes into to having a healthy approach to decolonising curriculum. So, I mean, in summary, I think what needs to happen is that grassroots leadership needs to be able to thrive as part of this process, and university management, which is generally white-led around this agenda, needs to be able to give leadership to more non-white leaders of this particular cause. Otherwise, there's always going to be a tension existing in the university based upon what it says at the very beginning. So there's a response to that question.
All right, thank you very much. Question we asked Davis, what it means in terms of policy and practice, but is there anybody who would like to jump in to add comments to Marlon's question on decolonisation of curriculum, what are the challenges?
Actually, I have a question for you. Is it?
Yes, it is.
So I was reading a comment from a chemistry professor on this topic of decolonizing curriculum, and he said, "It's got nothing to do with me. I can't do that. What would that even mean?" And my first thought was, "Come on, try harder, do better." Right? And I think that's the answer. I think that you can do better, even in an intro chemistry class. But I also think that perhaps he does need to try harder, that it's not as obvious to him as it is to those of us who study something having to do with humans and human behavior, things like this. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about how this might differ across disciplines.
Yeah, I think one aspect of decolonising curriculum knowledge is to look to indigenous knowledge bases, isn't it? So, I mean, as I said, like there's a universal approach to maybe to looking at chemistry. I'm not a chemist in that respect, but I'm assuming that there is. And say, for example, that chemistry tutor was working with a student from a different part of the world who had knowledge of indigenous approaches to chemistry, and that particular student brought those knowledge bases in and challenged the dominant discourses around it. I think you've got to be open to that, because that's critical thinking and that advances the thinking of the tutor and the student. So it's just those sorts of approaches to decolonising knowledge. You need to look at people in terms of what they're bringing to the subject. It's not always you who's the expert. You're learning from your students as well. So that's one way that's going to sort of look at what he's doing or she's doing.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question. And this is for you, Suda. How are race and inclusion studies conducted and received in different national and cultural contexts? And we know that you come from a very good context. Perhaps could you just give us some of that?
So I was thinking about this question in from the perspective of my linguistics background, as I mentioned. My training is in linguistics. I wonder how many languages do you all think are existent in the world today? Any guesses? How many languages are there in the world today?
Thousands?
Thousands? Over 7,000. Yes, exactly. Usually the guess is much lower than that. So good job. Over 7,000.
Could you hold the microphone
Oh,
to your mouth?
sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
So there are over 7,000 languages that linguists think are in existence in the world today, spoken as well as signed languages. And yet over half of the world's population speaks just 23 of them. So we're all very familiar with the hegemony of English, right, as a lingua franca and the consequences of that. But I think we think less about this idea that there are these 23 dominating over many thousands. And furthermore, many of these languages are endangered. Something like 40% of these over 7,000 languages are endangered at this moment. And with the loss of a language, that when the last speaker of the language dies, we lose culture, we lose identity, right? There's so much that is bound up with language. It's not just the kinds of sounds that come out of your mouth, but it is fundamental to who we are. So this is a tremendous tragedy. Okay? So in my field in child language acquisition, there was recently a review paper looking at the 4 major journals. As I mentioned, I'm the editor of one of those journals. And they looked at the languages that were being studied, about which there were studies published in these journals. And it was better than 23, it was 103. So that's, better, but still, many, many thousands of languages that have not been studied from the perspective of child language acquisition, or really from any perspective, for the vast majority of them. So thinking about, what does this mean for the state of our knowledge? I'll just give you one very small example. This may resonate with those of you who may be practitioners, educators of very young children. In my work, we look at how children acquiring different languages, what their experiences look like, and how it might differ. So for a very long time, we noticed that young children, and I'm going to say young children here because that's what we thought we meant, but in fact we were talking about young English acquiring children in the Western world. Most of the words that they know at 2 and 3 and 4 are nouns that label objects and people, right? Ball, book, truck, mommy, daddy. These are early words that children know. And so we thought, hey, the nouns are easier to learn than verbs and adjectives and prepositions. Like, that seems like a good starting point for a theory. And theories developed out of these ideas. Why is it that these kinds of words are easy to learn and these other kinds of words are difficult to learn? And then people started looking at other languages and found that there is still a noun bias in other languages of the world, but the picture becomes much more complicated. So children who are learning Mandarin know many more verbs relative to English learning children. And if you look more closely, you start to see why this might be the case. Chinese moms as compared to white American or British moms tend to talk more about the actions that their children should and shouldn't do and can and can't do as compared to labeling, what's this, what's that kind of thing. So the children are having different experiences around the world, right? And these are shaping the languages that they speak. This is very, like I said, a very small, kind of trivial seeming example. But it has consequences, first of all, practically speaking. So now we have, say, a Mandarin-speaking child who goes into the classroom, preschool classroom on the first day, and it maybe knows some English, maybe he's learning English, maybe knows a lot of English, but maybe that English looks different from the English speakers who were raised by native English-speaking parents. So what does that mean? Is this a problem? Like, does this child have a language disorder? Do we need to intervene? How do we know? I mean, what does it even mean? But also theoretically, right? So all our theories in linguistics and most disciplines, all disciplines, the theories were developed by white, Western, in my field less male, but in most other fields primarily male scholars who were speakers of English, German, or French. And what would it mean for our science of language or of any other discipline if in fact the people who were developing these theories were speakers of the Mande languages of West Africa or the Austronesian languages of Southeast Asia, right? And it's not the case that these scholars were not looking at other languages. They were looking at many other languages spoken around the world, including languages that were endangered. But because of the way our brains work, it's very difficult for us to think outside the box, right? So they were imposing their understanding of English grammar, French grammar, whatever, onto these other languages and saying, how do these languages differ from mine, rather than what should my theory of this language be in its own right. And so when we're thinking about these questions, I think we have to keep in mind the limitations of our human brains. And it's not enough to say, I'm going to go out and study these other understudied languages, or I'm going to interact with scholars from these other disciplines. We have to go back and sort of begin at the beginning, right? So now we're in a better position than ever to include scholars from all around the world, from the developing world, in ways that we couldn't do before. And this is an effort that I think our academic journals have a huge role to play in this. Translation, as Mihaela said, is one way to get at this. But that doesn't undo the theorizing that's been done already. And so we need to be able to kind of undo our thinking. And that, I think, is going to be the great, tremendous challenge that we have coming at us now.
Thank you. Essentially, you're asking us to rethink the lens in which we look through our work through, sort of rethinking the lens. Anybody wants to jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. This was really so interesting and fascinating. And I have a question on what you said about the ways in which researchers impose English grammar as sedimented in their brains onto the study of other languages. And I'm just wondering if, when we talk about human brains limitations, we don't somehow absolve people of a responsibility to think beyond, very ingrained, hardwired, and yet socialized habits of doing research and thinking.
Yes, that's a great point. I don't mean to absolve. This is true. What we need to do is, A, be aware of our limitations of our brains, B, work harder to overcome those limitations, and C, get to those people who don't have our brains, right? They need to be doing the work. We need to make it easier for scholars who speak these other languages, for example, come from these other traditions, who are using indigenous knowledge in their practice, in their theory. We need to make it easier to learn from them through inclusion. Right? This is what it's all about.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, of course. What, do you want them?
I'll be really quick. It's really, really interesting conversation. Is anybody from Mauritius here? No, because you might know more than me. I'll be really quick because I've done some work in Mauritius, and I know that when it comes to language, when it comes to teaching and learning, that because of the colonial legacies, the media is spoken in French and education is done in English, yet the dominant language in Mauritius is Creole. And so most people in Mauritius, they think in Creole, they speak in Creole, but they've got to learn English. And I bet there's some students here who, from your own, you might think in your own language and speak your own language, but in Edinburgh, you've got to learn in English. And so what some of the studies have shown is that where teaching in Mauritius, where groups have been taught in Creole, that the grades have risen. So it shows you that the legacies of colonialism, where we give greater validity to indigenous languages, that can raise the profile of students. I guess at the same time, what some people will say is that, well, by asking our students to learn in English, that's going to give them opportunity to sort of see the world in a more sort of global perspective. So that's that argument that way in a minute. Let's keep teaching them in English because it's going to give them more opportunities, so that's the tension that is there.
Yeah, just very briefly, I'll say that the amazing thing about the human brain is that we can learn many languages, right? And we should start with the one that our families know, that our families speak, so that we get, and this is just from like a pure scientific, like let's leave aside for a moment the cultural aspects. It is better for the human brain to develop with language input from someone who speaks the language well. So if your parents, English is not their first language, it's better for your brain development for them to speak to you in the language that they are comfortable in. And then, once you have a solid brain foundation, you can do anything, right? So it's very easy to learn other languages.
Okay, I'm sure Mohammed has got more questions, but we'll have to move to the last question. And we can take other questions, and I'm sure we've got a lot of language educators in the audience as well, so I'm pretty sure we'll be revisiting that topic. Davis, this is to you. How can we enact policy and practice in university settings, and what are the tensions and unintended side effects? Now, Jack has given me 5 minutes. So go ahead, and then we'll go to question and answer.
Okay. As standing in for James, but I'm gonna give the experiences that we've had here within Murray Health. And when we know that at this point, many universities have jumped onto the bandwagon with individual members of staff, like you mentioned, as in people that are maybe not authentically interested in decolonizing, but there is a way for career progression and they have gone into there. And some institutions have responded because every other university is responding to that. And so for us as policy and practice, you are looking at, we are an international university, we've got a diverse staff and student population. And when it came particularly to this school is how do you embrace the idea of decolonizing our curriculum? And how are you going to be careful with all those unintended consequences? So one of the things I think that I would say that we might have struggled with here would be first as in how we communicated the process of decolonizing and going out there within the whole school and explaining to members of staff that might not see it necessary for them to decolonize their pedagogy, to decolonize their curriculum. How did we do that communication? So as Director of Learning and Teaching, I continue to question myself regarding that did we make it really kind of clear, or was there clarity there in terms of the necessity, in terms of as a school, we talk a lot about social justice. And we've got all these values as a school regarding social justice. And when you look at decolonizing, it's all to do with truth and justice. And that truth and justice, in terms of the voices that have been marginalized and those voices that have been marginalized, what we tend to do there is that we sustain disempowerment of certain members of staff. We sustain that disempowerment of students. So when our students come into our classrooms and we have not decolonized our curriculum, we are sustaining that disempowerment. Those structural inequities are still there. But how do we go about doing that? So it has been a difficult process, how to instill that necessity to say that, yes, we need fairness and inclusion in our learning and teaching experience. The experience that our students, what we term the home student, what we call then the international student, they've got different experiences where they are coming from. So in relation again to the question in policy and practice, the unintended tensions that have been there is how we bring all members of staff to understand it is necessary that we go through this. And you talk well about epistemic injustices, as in making people aware that they are indigenous, there are multiple sources of knowledge out there. And when you talk about research again, as in we are focusing more ourselves maybe within learning and teaching, but I don't think as a school we have gone even more deeper into going to research knowledge and exchange and saying, what is it that you are doing about decolonizing? Because people will be going out there and they will be producing knowledge. But in the production of knowledge, when they are applying to you and is there a policy within our research knowledge exchange that is in line with our learning and teaching? And I'm putting my hand up here as Director of Learning and Teaching and saying, have I gone to the other side, RKE, and said, here is what we have ourselves as a policy that we are putting into place and practices that we want to promote, put into place in terms of decolonizing our curriculum, that it is necessary for us to decolonize our curriculum. For them is when people are applying and they are going out, particularly when they are doing all those ethics. And you gave an example again of sitting on a journal editorial board. There have been situations myself, I've looked at articles and people have just a simple statement of, we were unable to access more local voices. But that material has gone to publication. So what is the role of editorial board? To be sensitive about how people go round and continue to perpetuate just a dominant Western voice to the neglect of indigenous voices, because you feel like they have ticked a tick box of limitations have been cited. Okay, and we are happy that they have said, oh, there were these limitations, we couldn't find local voices, or they didn't come to us, and making sense of that local knowledge from a Western perspective. I've been here for a long time myself, so sometimes when I work with colleagues at home, I am careful, as in, am I really, are the findings that we are taking out there and the knowledge that we are contributing to this debate in international development, is it coming from the marginalized? Is it coming from the beneficiaries? Or am I interpreting it from the theories, being theoretical, because there is a need for me to apply a theory, and the theory that was developed in the Western world. And if I don't have that theory that was developed in the Western world, maybe my material won't look like it is adding something, it is extending something there. So all these challenges, careful about the 5 minutes. So I would like to end with things like, if for now, this university is going through a process which we call curriculum transformation program. And within that curriculum transformation program, there are certain questions that we should be asking ourselves is, who is designing the curriculum, and who is going to be teaching the curriculum that we are designing, and what is going to be taught within that curriculum, what is currently being taught, how different is this curriculum transformation going to be to what is currently being taught, and how is it being taught now, and what are the changes in how it is going to be taught after our curriculum transformation, and why is it being taught, and those dominant canons of knowledge. Is our curriculum transformation going to change that? Now, some other, again, going back to policy and practice, some other institutions have said, maybe we need a consultant, an outsider to come and guide and drive us through that. I'm sitting on now the last part of that curriculum, and so is Labake on the curriculum transformation project. And we have externals that are working with us, an organization called Now, or something like that, Now River Egyptian, something like that. And I'm questioning myself most of when you look at the composition of that body and say, okay, what voices would we bring? And I hope James was here even to answer some of these things. Here's an external organization. What mechanisms, what approaches are they using to ensure that there is co-creation, and that co-creation is looking at staff and students, and there is a realization of the staff and student being diverse, being international, and a joining in of those voices. And I have been given a sign that you need to stop talking.
Thank you very much, David. But if we can, 30 seconds, if anybody wants to jump in. 30 seconds for Mihaela and 30 seconds for Marlon.
Yeah, I think I like what you said. I think in terms of policy and practice in university settings, tensions. I think goes back to looking at evidence-based practice across the academy, where each university is contextual, but if you can extract best practice on decolonising critical knowledge from different universities, then you might be able to apply that to your own setting as well. And just one last thing, I think some of the tensions are, from my experience of working with colleagues and students as well, especially white British students, is quite, Brighton has quite a few of those in the course that I teach. Some students just aren't ready for what. They may be ready for it, but I think sometimes when you start using terms such as whiteness and white supremacy and colonialism and re-westernisation, they can sort of colour in a little bit. So this is where you have to be able to sort of explain and teach around the different positionalities of decolonising curriculum so that they can know what we're dealing with. In effect, we're turning knowledge on its head. So we're not dismissing knowledge, we're turning it on its head, and we're giving them the opportunity to look at the world in different ways.
Can I just quickly pick on what you just said, and also something you mentioned in your talk about how do you, again I'm going to get stuck, efficaciously communicate the imperative of decolonization. I think the one thing that often gets forgotten and gets drowned in discussions of antagonistic discussions about decolonization and this is a special request, this is an add-on, something else I have to do. I think what's important is to really emphasize that this decolonization and diversification of sources that we look at is an imperative of good research, period. I mean, it's not something that is optional or something that is a gift that we give to those who ask for it. As many people who are objecting to the project say, it's just an integral part of good academic research. Thoroughness. Yeah, so, sorry, I don't need to have the last word. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're going to open up for question and answer. We do have a microphone here. Or maybe we don't need a microphone. So, raise your hands. We've got one gentleman at the back here. You can just ask your question, and if you've got a particular panelist that you want to direct the question to.
My name is Asim, I work for General Teaching Council for Scotland, and before asking the question, I just want to take a moment to express my admiration for CERES and for their work and pay tribute to it. We have a lot of work going on in Scottish education, particularly under the RIGEN programme, and I think a lot of that work simply would not be happening if it weren't for the improved understanding of race and racism in education that CERES gave us. So big up CERES and no pressure RIGEN, but big shoes to fill. So my question was about decolonising the curriculum, and my main question was what do you think is the status of understanding of decolonising the curriculum amongst teachers? And if a teacher were to pull you aside in a staff room and say, tell me, encapsulate for me what you mean by decolonising curriculum, what would you say? And just lastly, are there any areas of good practice you can point to? There's been a lot of fanfare for the new curriculum in Wales, anti-racist curriculum. Would you define that as a decolonised curriculum yourself?
I'd like to take that question, Marlon.
Yeah, one way I've examined that question, like, through a teaching perspective, is through history curriculum. It's a good starting point, really, and how mass migration is taught, especially in different curriculums in Scotland in that respect. I suspect that migration of people to Scotland is taught in some way. So, in the England and Wales curriculum, the only aspect of mass migration that's taught is about the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings, nothing else. There's nothing to do with people from the Caribbean or from Africa or from England, from China. There's nothing. It's all about white European mass migration, because the curriculum is hegemonic and it wants to tell the story of nation, not the story of people. And I think the story of people is more important than the story of the government story of nation, kings and queens in that respect. So that's the kind of conversation you could have with a teacher in terms of, and especially if they're working in a multicultural classroom, and if they're interested in avoiding from inflicting epistemic violence through that myopic approach to teaching history, then you can teach about mass migration through the histories of peoples who've come to the British Isles over the ages. So I start there. They can go to the mass curriculum and look at number, for example, and talk about how number isn't just about Roman numerals. That number comes from the Babylonians in that respect, and all different cultures around the world. So it's to give broader approaches to teaching about the subjects, but not dismissing Anglo-Saxons and Vikings or Roman numerals. That's there, but there's more out there in that respect.
And the question about what would you say to a teacher, what decolonisation means?
What it means, I don't know if I'd use the term epistemologists with all due respect, just alternative ways of knowing and alternative ways of sharing how people see the world, really, and how people live in the world, and how people map their lives in the world, really. And I think that's important, because that will give their students and teachers a better way of seeing different peoples around the world in terms of how they live.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've got another, thank you, Marlon. We've got another question from GT, from Language Education.
Hello, thank you very much, panelists, for your rich conversation about decolonising the curriculum, race inclusivity. So there's a wide range of topics. So I'm actually lost in terms of where I start. I think I probably have more of a comment than a question. And so I go back to, I think, the point Marlon mentioned about multiculturalism and the kind of North American perspective drawing on the work of Patricia Collins, which you referenced earlier. And I did get the sense that you perhaps do not think that's an appropriate approach or effective enough approach to addressing the issue of decolonizing the curriculum. And so that's a strand that I tend to get when I read some of the literature on multiculturalism within this side of the Atlantic. And there seems to be that impression, and I think a lot of this is influenced by the work of scholars within cultural studies and the phrase that was coined, benevolent multiculturalism. And that tends to give them a very narrow perspective of what multiculturalism is, particularly from a critical multiculturalism perspective, which also addresses issues of representation of different knowledges, knowledge base, and I'll also underline that addresses issues of social and structural inequalities within institutions, schools, and this has a long tradition from the civil rights movement in the US and addressing issues around desegregation of schools. So from that perspective, I think is a huge benefit and precursor to this more modern approach to decolonizing the curriculum. And I think it deals with the issues of challenging one particular perspective of knowledge, the Eurocentric approach, the Western canon, and so forth, and underlying that, is it resonates with a lot of the work that the Latin American scholars who are the champions and of decolonial thought. And I'm referring to scholars like Walter and so forth.
I'm going to have to stop there. Would you like to?
So basically, it fits, along that whole concept and theory around coloniality of knowledge. Because when we talk about the colonial theory, we tend to think about it from a political and economic decolonization. But there is that corollary to knowledge, and I think multicultural scholarship, does make a huge contribution to decolonizing.
Okay. Do you want to go back on that?
Yeah, hopefully, I think transformative critical multicultural education is what I spoke about, and I'll be really brief. Really, I mean, I've done quite a lot of work in schools in that respect, looking at history curriculum in that respect. When it comes to decolonising curriculum knowledge, I'm not just talking about the school curriculum, I'm talking about the knowledge that we're exposed to in society in general. And I've done quite a bit of work in sport as well. So, for example, there are quite a few sports out there that can appear to be quite diverse. Football appears to be quite diverse, but golf doesn't, or cycling doesn't. I've done quite a bit of work on cycling, and in another book that I've written, I'm going to promote another book. Yeah, why not? It's called Black Champions in Cycling, all right? Now, what this book did is it turned the notion of cycling as being represented by white athletes on its head, and it examined, it basically is a chronology, a history of the black presence in the sport since Major Taylor, the USA 1899 world champion, to the current day. And this is done through narrative and biographical methodologies, because the curriculum makers around cycling are the broadcasters, are the media. Okay, so when you switch on the television today and you watch the Tour of Spain, you're going to see generally white commentators fetting the sport, talking about the dominance, talking about the athletes who are generally white, okay, and maybe even referring to the historical champions in the sport who are white in that respect. So I would argue that this book is an example of transformative critical multiculturalism, because it doesn't dismiss the white athletes. I mean, there is some reference to some white athletes in this, but it foregrounds the stories of the marginalised in that respect. So, yeah, that's
with that, thank you very much, Marlon. And as you can see, I've sort of moved on to the next slide. And I wanted to give some time for the panel to give their last remark, but I fear that the remarks are going to go on and on. So, you will have time with the panels when we go have tea and coffee. But I'd like to invite Professor Sarah Cunningham-Burley to give a closing remark. Thank you, Professor, for waiting on for your time. But would you like to, maybe we should just pass you the microphone. And
say thank you.
Are you happy to be there? Or?
Yeah, I'll
we want to make sure that we have you on camera, so maybe over this side, because the camera's over there, so if you don't mind.
Now you tell me. Right.
Yeah,
Hi, can everyone hear? Okay. So, first of all, thanks very much, Rebecca, for inviting me to come. I've had a great morning. I always learn so much from these and many other events that I try to attend. Many of you won't know me, so I'm Sarah Cunningham-Burley. I'm a medical and family sociologist with my academic background, and I'm one of the deans in Edinburgh Medical School. So, slightly unusual kind of institutional location, and I'm also what's called the University Lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, which I view as a kind of quietly disruptive role. I somehow sit in between everything that goes on at the university and the senior leadership team, of which I am not a part of, but I interact with, in order to try and really deepen our commitments to change in this area. So I think this network is going to be a wonderful network, and I think all networks are real agents for change. So they bring together people with their scholarship, their direct experience, and their commitments to make a difference. And that's why we're all in education. It's why we produce and share our knowledge and learn from each other and our students. So I really look forward to working with the network in the future. And I'd really like to thank Farah and all the panel for their contribution today. And I think it has made me reflect on how much more we need to do, particularly as we think about the curriculum transformation programme within the University of Edinburgh, which has already been mentioned. And I would like to kind of reassure that my own approach is certainly to not resort to or to try and overcome that tendency towards tick box, which can happen as you start to mainstream things, to kind of embed. There's always a danger that that process can dilute the very process of change that you're trying to promote or provoke. In relation to the curriculum transformation programme, I'm hoping, and I think we're very near to getting to the final approval stages of this, to bring external experts in who can help push us to change in those deep ways that are required to really make a difference in terms of our curriculum, and likewise in relation to decolonising. We will also be deepening what we're doing here to make it well beyond the tick box, and to support those schools in order to be able to answer the kinds of questions that Makila has I think it was you that said about, who said about the chemistry teacher? Yes, so the chemistry professor, or whoever it might be, saying, well, how do we do that? Or it doesn't apply to me or my subject area. It applies to everybody, because we absolutely have to think about how we produce knowledge and answer those questions: who, what, why, and how. So I'm hoping that we will be able to meet some of the critique that you have brought to this discussion, both on the panel and through the questions that we have here. And I should say I love the logo, because as a sociologist, obviously the structure agency dialectic is absolutely key. So that idea of the outside structure absolutely being embodied in who we all are as individuals and groups, minoritized or not, is absolutely key. And yet, as individuals or as collectives of individuals, we can make a difference to those structures, and that's what I'm sure and hope that this network will contribute to. I think it's really important that kind of management draws on the scholarship that is all around us in an institution, because actually that scholarship is telling us how to move forward, how to create a more equal, equitable institution as well as a more just society. So I think anything that can bring scholars together with managers and with each other and with our students is the way to go forward. And I really try through my work to draw on the expertise that is all around me, through Race Ed, this network, Gender Ed, other collectives that we have that are bringing our scholarship, our activist scholarship together, as well as our activists together to make a difference for the future. Happy to take any questions if there's anything specific you might want to ask me about my role, but also feel free to make contact and email me too. And thanks again, everyone. Thanks, panel, and thanks, Labaki, again for organising and bringing alive this network. And I look forward to more in the future.
Wow, what a brilliant note to end on. I think my voice is loud enough, honestly. Now, what is that laughter? Polite laughter, agreement, disagreement, or don't say. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful, closing remarks. Thank you so much, panelists. My goodness, I've been tweeting, I've been trying to capture some of the talks. I was trying to tweet about you and then I needed to come here. But it's been amazing having everyone along. I know the questions will never end, and that's why we have the extra 1 hour over lunch to actually, talk about these burning questions and also to look at some of the posters of some of the work we're currently doing as members of RIGEN. And very much looking forward to those partnerships, forging new partnerships, working with Critique, working with RISED, working with HiHash, working with you in taking forward the agendas, not as a tick box exercise, but bringing life to these conversations and knowing that this matters for everyone. Nothing more to add, but there is some good lunch available. Thank you.